Jae-won, a sound engineer in Seoul, was working a late-night shift when he received a call from an unknown number. He picked up, and his blood turned to ice. The voice on the other end was his own. It was tired, flat, and terrified. It said 3 words, "Don't go tomorrow." He hung up, convinced it was a sophisticated prank, but the calls didn't stop. The second call came 2 hours later, and this time, the voice was weeping. "You were there. You need to remember what you saw." The following day, a body was pulled from the Mapo Bridge, and Jae-won realized the voice wasn't trying to prevent a death. It was trying to prevent his own slow, deliberate erasure from existence. This is what happened when Jae-won stopped running from his own voice, and why he finally made the call that saved the man he was becoming. The apartment was the kind of quiet that only happens at 2 a.m. in November, when the city has finally run out of things to say. Jae-won sat at his workstation with his headphones around his neck, not working. The monitors glowed. An audio file was open on the screen, a cafe ambience track he had been hired to clean up. 16 minutes of background hiss and chair scrapes and milk steaming. He had been staring at the waveform for 40 minutes without touching it. The cursor blinked. The apartment was new. New to him, anyway. 2 months old, 3rd floor, Mapo-gu. He had chosen it because it was walking distance from the Han River, which he told himself was convenient, and not for any other reason. The walls were still bare. There was a single mug on the kitchen counter that had been there since Tuesday, and he kept meaning to wash it. His phone screen lit up on the desk beside the keyboard. Unknown number. He looked at it for the first ring, let it go for the second. On the third, he picked up, not because he expected anyone, but because it was easier than sitting in the quiet. Hello. Silence on the line. Not dead silence. There was something underneath it. A faint texture. The kind of ambient noise that a room makes when someone is breathing in it but not speaking. Jae-won had spent 12 years learning to hear that difference. Someone was there. Then the voice came. It said 3 words. Flat, controlled, delivered the way someone speaks when they are trying very hard not to sound frightened. "Don't go tomorrow." The call dropped. Jae-won held the phone against his ear for another 3 seconds, listening to nothing. Then he lowered it and looked at the screen. No call log, no missed call notification. The screen showed only the time, 2:11 a.m., and his wallpaper, which was a photograph he hadn't changed yet, the 2 of them at Gyeongbokgung on a day that was now more than a year gone. He set the phone down carefully, like it might ring again if he moved too fast. His first thought was technical, a crossed signal. It happened, rarely, but it happened. A looped recording fragment caught in a bad relay, compressed into something that sounded like speech. He had worked on broadcast audio long enough to know that digital lines did strange things at strange hours. The infrastructure under a city this large was old in places, patched in others, and occasionally it misfired in ways that were easy to explain if you knew where to look. He reached for that explanation and turned it over carefully, the way he would listen back to a track he wasn't sure about. It didn't hold. He had been recording and mixing voices professionally since he was 22. His own voice, he knew better than most people know theirs. He had listened to himself on playback hundreds of times, isolated his frequencies, EQ'd his own speech for demo reels and temp tracks when a client needed a placeholder. He knew the specific weight of it, the way he dropped the end of sentences slightly, the tightness that came into his upper register when he was tired. The voice on the call had all of it, every small marker. It was not similar to his voice. It was not a close approximation. It was his voice exactly, and it was frightened. Not panicked, not desperate, something quieter than that. The way a person sounds when the worst thing has already happened, and they are simply trying to get one thing right before the situation closes around them completely. Don't go tomorrow. He didn't have anything planned for tomorrow. That was what made it worse. He pulled up his calendar and looked at it. A mixing session in Hongdae, 10 a.m. Work he had done 100 times. A studio he had used for 6 years. Ordinary. Unremarkable. He closed the calendar. He did not close the tab. Outside, the Han River sat in the dark 2 streets over, moving the way it always moved, quietly, without explanation, carrying whatever the night had put into it. He slept for 2 hours and woke up before the alarm. Jae-won lay on his back in the gray November light, coming through the curtains, and stared at the ceiling for a while. The phone was on the nightstand where he had left it, screen down. He had not touched it since 2 a.m. He got up, made coffee, showered, and put on the jacket he always wore to sessions, the dark green one with the inside pocket for his hard drive. He moved through the morning the way you move through something you have decided not to think about yet. At 9:15, he locked the apartment and took the stairs down. The subway was full the way it always was on a weekday. Bodies pressed together in the warm, stale air, the recorded announcement cycling through stations in a voice that managed to sound both calm and completely indifferent. Jae-won stood near the door of the car with his bag over one shoulder and watched the tunnel walls slide past the dark window. 3 stops in, he felt it, the specific pressure of being watched. He looked up. Across the car, maybe 6 seats down, a woman in a charcoal coat was looking at him. She was somewhere in her 50s, unremarkable in every way except for her expression, which was not the blank forward stare of a commuter. She was watching him the way someone watches a person's standing too close to the edge of something. Not alarmed, not ready to intervene, just watching, with the resigned attention of a person who has seen what happens next and knows there is nothing she can do about it. Jae-won looked away. When the train reached Hongik University Station and the doors opened, he stepped out without looking back. He did not check whether she got off too. The studio was on a side street behind the main strip, a building he had been coming to for 6 years. The kind of place that never looked like much from the outside, but had good acoustics and a mixing board that still worked the way it should. His producer, Min-suk, was already there when Jae-won arrived, eating a convenience store triangle sandwich and pulling up the session files. They worked for 2 hours without incident. Dialogue edits on a short film, clean and straightforward. Jae-won focused the way he always could when there was actual sound in front of him. The work was something he could hold on to. It was during the break that Min-suk mentioned it. Offhand, the way you mention something you read on your phone while waiting for the kettle. Did you see the thing about the bridge? Mapo. Last night, they pulled someone out of the river this morning. Still unidentified. Jae-won kept his hands around his coffee cup. What happened? They don't know yet. Found a phone on the bank. No ID. Min-suk shrugged, already moving on. Probably nothing good. Is there a photo? Jae-won said. Of the person. Min-sik looked at him for a moment. Just a moment. With an expression Jae-won couldn't read. Then he picked up his phone and turned back to the board. Let's get the 3rd scene done before 6. Jae-won didn't push it. He finished the session, packed his hard drive, said goodbye the same way he always did, and took the subway home. He was on the platform at Mapo station, waiting for the connecting train, when the phone rang. Unknown number. Same one. He picked up on the first ring this time. The voice was his. Same weight, same frequency, same slight tightness in the upper register that only appeared when he was keeping something controlled by effort. It said, "You were there. You need to remember what you saw." 11 seconds. He counted them. Then silence. But not the empty silence of a dropped call. The silence of someone who has said what they came to say and is now waiting to see if it lands. The line stayed open for 3 more seconds before it closed. No distortion, no interference. The audio quality was perfect, close and clear. the way a voice sounds when the person speaking is standing in the same room. Jae-won stared at the track below the platform. The train he was supposed to take came and went without him. He had not been to the Mapo Bridge in 6 months. He was almost certain of that. Almost. He went to the bridge the way you go somewhere you've been trying not to go. Directly, without deciding, as if his feet simply remembered the route and his mind arrived after. It was dusk by the time he got there. The sky over the Han was the color of old concrete, flat and low, and the river below was dark and moving and completely indifferent to everything above it. The bridge lights had just come on. Traffic passed behind him on the road. A delivery rider on a scooter cut close to the railing and was gone. Jae-won stood at the top of the pedestrian walkway and looked out at the water for a moment before he looked down the path. There was police tape about 40 meters ahead, cordoning off a section of the railing. It moved slowly in the wind, off the river, yellow and purposeful, the way official things always look when they are marking a place where something has already finished happening. Beside the tape, someone had laid chrysanthemums directly on the concrete, white ones, still fresh, their stems wrapped in paper that had softened in the cold. There was a small candle in a glass holder that had gone out. There was a stone, and beneath the stone, held flat against the walkway, a photograph in a clear plastic sleeve. Jae-won walked toward it, slowly. He told himself he was just looking. He crouched down and lifted the stone and picked up the photograph and held it in both hands under the bridge light. He looked at it for a long time without moving. The man in the photograph was him, not someone who looked like him in a general way, not a stranger with the same build or the same style of glasses, or similar features that the mind resolves into familiarity when it is already primed to find patterns. Him, the exact specific arrangement of his face, his jaw, the way his eyes sat slightly closer together than most people's, a detail his wife had once mentioned and he had never forgotten. The jacket in the photograph was dark green with a chest pocket on the left side. He had bought it last March at a shop near Itaewon Station. He was wearing it right now. The man in the photograph looked younger by about a year, or not younger, quieter. The way a face looks before it has been through something that leaves a mark. Jae-won set the photograph back down exactly as he had found it. He placed the stone on top of it. He stood up and gripped the railing with both hands and looked at the river. 6 months ago, the night his wife had said the word done and meant it, he had walked from their apartment to this bridge. He had stood at this railing, not this exact section, but close, maybe 30 meters east, for 20 minutes. He had looked at the water the way he was looking at it now. Then he had walked home, made tea he didn't drink, and never told anyone. He had thought of it as a moment he had passed through, a low point with a flaw. The photograph suggested otherwise. The calls had felt like warnings, a voice from ahead in time, reaching back to stop something. That was the shape he had given them, because it was the shape that made the most sense and left the least amount of space for the alternative. But standing here now, with his hands on the railing of the Mapo Bridge and a photograph of his own face under a stone at his feet, the alternative was the only thing left. The calls were not from his future. They were from somewhere else entirely. A version of the same night, a different outcome, a man who had stood at a railing and made a different choice and ended up in the river below. And the man in the river had not been alone in making that choice. Jae-won let go of the railing and stepped back. The water moved below, steady and dark, the same as it always was, carrying whatever the night had put into it, giving none of it back. He needed to get home before 2:11 a.m. He thought he understood now why that time kept appearing. And he thought he understood, with a cold and careful certainty, that whatever had come for the man in the photograph already knew where he lived. He did not sleep. He sat at his workstation with the recording app open on his phone and waited. The apartment was the same as it always was at this hour. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional sound of a car on the street below, the particular silence of a building in which everyone else was unconscious. Jae-won had the overhead light off and the monitor on low. He had a glass of water he hadn't touched. He had the phone propped against the base of the monitor so the microphone faced outward, toward the room, the way he would position a condenser mic for a room tone recording. He had tested the levels twice. Whatever came through tonight, he would have it on file. The clock in the corner of his screen moved to 2:11 a.m. The phone rang once. He picked up. The voice came immediately, his own, but different from the first two calls. Not tight or urgent, not compressed by fear into 3 words and a dropped line. This time it was almost calm, the way a person sounds when they have rehearsed something for a long time and have finally accepted that the rehearsal is over. It said, "You went to the bridge today. Good. Now I need you to hear the rest of it." Jae-won did not speak. He kept his eyes on the recording levels, watched the green bar move with every syllable, and listened. The voice described a man. It described him carefully, without drama, the way a technician describes a process, step by step, so nothing is missed. The man had stood on the Mapo Bridge 6 months ago, on a night in late spring, after his wife said the word that ended their marriage. He had stood at the railing for 20 minutes and looked at the water and thought about what it would mean to stop. Then he had walked home. He had made tea. He had not told anyone, not a friend, not a doctor, not the wife who was already gone. He had filed the night away and kept moving. But moving, the voice said, was not the same as surviving. In the months that followed, the man had begun to make himself smaller. He gave up the apartment they had shared and moved somewhere temporary, somewhere with bare walls and a mug on the counter he never washed. He told clients he was changing his number and didn't give them the new one. He stopped returning calls from people who had known him when he was someone's husband. He told himself this was practical, a clean start. The voice on the phone said it was not a clean start. It was an erasure, slow, careful, one thing at a time, until the person who had stood on that bridge 6 months ago would be impossible to find because he had already quietly ceased to exist. The body in the river, the voice said, was what the erasure looked like when it finished. The police would close it as a suicide. There would be no next of kin contacted because there were no records connecting the man in the water to a name anyone was still looking for. The photograph under the stone would stay there until the rain took it, and no one, not Min-suk, not the detective who filed the report, not the woman on the subway who had watched him with that particular resigned attention, would look for who he had been before, because that person had already done most of the work of disappearing. "That is what I am," the voice said. "That is what you are still choosing, one day at a time, whether you know it or not." Then the line closed. Jae-won sat in the blue light of the monitor and did not move for a long time. The recording app showed 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The levels had been clean throughout. No dropout, no distortion, every word captured and intact. He had spent 12 years understanding sound. He understood this one. He picked up the phone, not to call the unknown number back. He opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he had not pressed in 4 months. His wife's name, his ex-wife, the woman who had said the word done and meant it, and who he had never once told about the bridge. He didn't call. Not yet. He set the phone down and looked at her name on the screen and understood that the call he needed to make had nothing to do with tomorrow night. It had to do with 6 months ago and the 20 minutes he had never given anyone the chance to know about. The apartment was very quiet. For the first time in months, the quiet felt different. Not like a room emptied of something, but like a room waiting to be used. The sky outside the window was beginning to lighten, not fully, not yet, but enough that the outlines of the buildings across the street had started to separate from the dark, that pale, undecided hour before the city commits to being awake. Jae-won had not moved from the workstation since the call ended. At some point, he had turned the monitor off, and now the room was lit only by the window, gray and thin and honest in the way that dawn light always is, the way it shows everything without any warmth to soften it. The glass of water was still on the desk. He drank it now, slowly, looking at nothing in particular. The recording app on his phone showed 2 minutes and 47 seconds. He had listened back to it once, immediately after the line closed, with his headphones on and the volume at full. He had listened the way he listened to everything, carefully, without letting himself react, until he reached the end. Then he had taken the headphones off and set them down and sat in the quiet for a long time. He opened his contacts. He scrolled to her name. He had not deleted it, which was the one piece of honesty he had managed in 4 months of otherwise systematic withdrawal. He looked at it on the screen the same way he had looked at it an hour ago, except that an hour ago he had set the phone down and looked away. This time he pressed call. It rang twice. She answered. Her voice was alert in the way that someone sounds when they have been asleep, but not deeply. When some part of them has been waiting for something, even if they don't know what. She said his name, a question without a question mark. Yeonji, he said. He heard her breath on the line. She did not speak. She did not hang up. She simply waited, with the particular patience of someone who has learned that the first thing a person says is rarely the thing they actually called to say. He looked out the window at the gray outlines of the buildings. I need to tell you about the bridge, he said. 6 months ago. The night you said, the night I left the apartment. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm listening, he told her. Not about the calls, not yet, just about the bridge. The 20 minutes at the railing. What he had looked at, and what he had thought about, and the fact that he had walked home and never said a word to anyone, not because he was protecting her from it, but because saying it out loud would have made it real, and making it real would have meant admitting how close the floor had actually been. When he finished, the line was quiet, not empty. She was still there. He could hear the small ambient sound of her breathing, her room, the particular texture of her being present on the other end of the call. Okay, she said finally, just that word, in a voice that carried nothing he could easily name, but nothing he needed to be afraid of. They talked for a long time after that. Not about everything. There was not enough mourning for everything, but enough. 3 days later, Jae-won sat across from a detective in a small office near Mapo station. The detective had a coffee he hadn't touched and a folder open on the desk between them. He had reopened the case quietly, without announcement, after a tip from someone Jae-won did not know and could not explain. Jae-won set his phone on the desk and played the recording, 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The detective listened without expression. When it ended, he closed the folder and said he would be in touch. The 4th call never came. Jae-won did not know, in the end, whether the other version of him had been identified, whether the case was closed with a name attached, or whether someone had finally gone looking for who the man in the water had been, before the erasure was complete. He did not know if the silence from the unknown number meant the caller had been found, or simply that he had finally been heard. What he knew was this: the recording existed. The voice on it was his, and on a morning in late November, with the city coming back to life outside a 3rd-floor window in Mapo-gu, he had picked up the phone and called someone and said something true. He had walked home again, on purpose, this time, knowing the distance, knowing the weight of it, choosing the route anyway. That was enough to begin with. That was, for now, enough. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.